Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our September lecture. I'm Sylvie Andrews, the director of the Gresham Historical Society. We have been doing these talks since March, and I'm pleased to see that this is one of the better attended ones. I am here to introduce our public historian, Stephanie Vallance, who will be moderating this live interview. Stephanie has been with us since 2022 as our public historian, and she has been gathering oral history interviews with Gresham residents, past and present, which she and our intern, Melissa, this year made into a podcast called Voices of Gresham. And if you haven't listened, it's definitely worth a listen. They're using interviews from our oral history collection to build these stories about Gresham. And we've had over 1,000 downloads so far, so that's very exciting. Stephanie's really good at telling a story, and she's also really good at bringing out other people's stories. So I'm going to let her get to it.
Thank you, Sylvie. Yes, today I am not going to be telling any stories. I'm going to be asking our panel, our esteemed panelists, to tell us their stories, which comprised with many other people, tell the history of Gresham. So as a person who did not grow up in Gresham, I have learned a lot about Gresham in a really special way, and that's by listening to the lived experience of those who have lived here, who have lived the history. And if you ever get a chance, our oral history collection is really wonderful and rich, and we have voices represented all the way back from the turn of the 20th century. And so today, we're going to bring it current. And we have representatives here from several different generations in Gresham's history. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. And panelists, I'm going to pass the mic. We're going to start with Michael. And I would like you to introduce yourself, what year you were born, and where you grew up. And that can be, you can answer that question however you would like, however you interpret it.
My name is Michael Lasfetto. I was born on October 7th, 1987, so my birthday's a week from Monday. Thank you. And I was born at Woodland Park Hospital in the Park Rose neighborhood. And I spent my first 2 years of life there, and then I moved to right next to what is now Oliver Middle School when I was 2, and we lived there until 1998, and then we moved into another house on the other side of the school complex across the street from what is now Park Lane Elementary School. So I'm technically a Portland resident.
Get out.
By if it was Stark Street, 4 blocks. But since I live on Main, it's more like 10. And I went to Centennial High School and was in the class of '06. And now I teach in the Centennial School District. And I think, I'm trying to remember what the other question was.
That was it, where you were born and where you grew up.
Yes, so Rockwood-ish.
Way to start us off. Good job. Hello, my name is Jenny Byrne. It was Jenny Heapus when I was growing up here in Gresham. I was born on Christmas Day of 1968, and my family lived very close to where you live now. I would say that, I grew up in 2 places. First, on 151st and Stark, that's where my family lived until I was in the 6th grade when we moved into Gresham proper. It wasn't Gresham then, but it is now. But my grandparents lived on 4th, just at the top of the hill between Toll and Wallula. And because my grandma was a school teacher, we spent every Friday night with my grandparents and then all summer. So all my friends, all the people I hung out with were here in Gresham. So I feel like I grew up kind of in both places.
My name is Joe Breniser. January 30th, 1947 is when I was born. I was probably conceived in the home that I live in right now. The house that's at the entrance to the Club Paisano, Cedarville Park, 3678 West Powell Loop. My father bought it after he got out of high school, he graduated from Gresham High School. And
That's where you live.
My name is Elizabeth Jones, but most people call me Liz. I was born in my grandfather's home because my dad's car wouldn't start, and so the doctor had to come over there and deliver me on the kitchen table. At least that was I was told over all the years. So after I was born, my birth certificate says Troutdale, even though I was born in Fairview, but Fairview was not incorporated yet. Oh, did I say I was born October 30th? Because 1933. After I was born, we moved to a farm on the top of 190th, which at that time was called Pleasant View Avenue, just up the hill from where he lives now. And I lived there, went to Pleasant Valley Grade School because we were right on the border between our driveway, in fact, was where the bus turned around. And let's see, anything else?
That was perfect. You can just keep that with you, Liz. You can hold on. You can hand that back to Liz. Yep. So the way I'm going to do this, and if you notice, if you were doing any math in your head, then we have Michael, who is representing the generation who is in their 30s. Jenny's representing those in their 50s. We have the 70s represented by Joe, and Liz, the 90s. I think that deserves a round of applause. We were hoping to find somebody who was 10, but it didn't happen that way. So Michael's going to represent everyone 40 and below. But we're going to start with you, Liz, and I'm going to ask a question, and you can start with answering it, and then if anybody else would like to respond to that question, then you can pass the mic down, and then we'll move on from there. So, Liz, what constituted your community when you were a child? Who comprised your community?
Farmers. Farmers. I lived, I was trying to think what else. It was just farming mostly, berry farming. We had berries, we had cucumbers, we even had filberts, which they call hazelnuts now, but I still call them filberts. And our neighbors were farmers, and that's who we mostly shared time with.
And I know this about you, that you have sisters.
I have two older sisters. One's 94, the other one will be 93 in December. And I'll be 91 in October.
And then another
and
younger.
I have a young one who's 80. She was born 10 years later.
the baby.
Yeah.
So you spent a lot of time with your sisters and the neighbors around you. Who else did you play with when you were a child growing up?
Well, once we started school, of course, we played with our schoolmates. But we just played with the neighbor kids. And since I was the third born, my two sisters were kind of closer together, so whenever we went out to play, I always heard, "Mom, does she have to go with us?" So you know how us third born kind of turn out to be readers, which I read a lot. And I had my favorite pear tree out the back door. I climbed the tree and took my book, and that's where I'd spent a lot of time.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else want to answer that question?
You want to weigh in on that, Joe?
Joe, who constituted your community?
well, we were not farmers, but my dad had a small farm that he used to subsidize our living. He had two jobs, and one of the things that was remarkable to me as I think back is he worked from daylight to dark. Our community was Cedarville area, and there was a lot of older families, younger families, and a lot of people that had been impacted by the war. So there was a lot of people that were war veterans that were associated in the area where I was growing up. So it was a patriotic time, but I guess the community was just the group that I grew up with.
Joe, when you say the war, you mean World War II,
World War II.
to clarify.
Yeah.
And you were born just after the war was over.
Right.
But I know, and I remember from our conversations together, that there were some specific veterans who were really impactful to you as a young boy growing up.
Well, at the corner of 190th and Powell, before it got realigned, there was three actually veterans there. It was Mary and her husband, Jim, were both, Mary was a nurse and Jim was a war veteran in Europe. And then Matt was Mary's brother, and they run that little grocery store on the corner of 190th and Powell. And they'd get together on holidays with their kids, and we'd socialize. There was always a lot of drinking that went on too. But that was one of the, and then my mom's brother-in-law, and Ione was her sister. He was a tail gunner in the Second World War. So there was an awful lot of war stories that we weren't told about, but we knew that they existed. But
Great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jenny, what did you do for fun when you were a child?
Oh boy. My mom is in the room, so I'll just tell you the things that I know. She's talking about when I was little, Mom, not high school. So, like, as I said, my grandparents lived on Northwest 4th, and so I was really good friends with, there were kids on the whole side of the street. All the houses had kids, and so there was a lot, those were my people. And I went to private school, so I didn't really know the kids in my own neighborhood, so those were my friends. And my brother and I we rode our bikes everywhere. When you see the videos of like Gen X and like we rode our bikes until the street lights came on and we drank out of the hose and our parents thought we were just like down at our friend's house, but we were really like, 3 miles away. That is 100% true of my generation. So my brother and I would get on our bikes at my grandma's house on 4th, and back then Eastman wasn't a thing. In fact, my mom and I drove by it today. My great grandma lived on 1st Street, right where Eastman is now, and they actually moved her house onto Norman, and I made my mom go by there with me today because I was like, I think I know which one it is, but I'm not really sure. So we would straight down, it's a straight shot, and we would race every time, and he would always win because he was braver than I was. I didn't want to wreck. And so we'd get down here and we'd go to Rexall drugstore and we'd have our like 50 cents, and they must have hated it when we walked in because we would take forever to pick on our candy. And then we'd come here and go to the library, and as I remember it, the kids section was like right in here, and it was cool even in the summer. I don't know how they kept it cool with no air conditioning, but it always felt like it was cooler in the summer. And so we'd hang out here and we'd read books or check out a book, and then we'd, go to the fairgrounds because we had like dirt racetracks around the fairgrounds. And again, my brother was braver than I was. And we would just ride our bikes all around down here. And then when we get hungry, we would go back up to my granny's house and eat some lunch or whatever, because it's way easier to get down the hill from Wallula than it is to get up the hill back to 4th. So it would take us a long time to get up there. So, we did stuff like that, and we'd go up to Bella Vista Park with our friends and we rode a lot of bikes when we were kids. I think that, and then we had, it was a weird time because there was like a video arcade down here. It was the first video arcade that we had, was billiards and bagels, and so we would go there and play video games. And it was just a time when like you still had these kind of things that everybody had always done, but yet there was lots of new stuff that you were able to do. So it was a really cool time. So.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that context, was around the time that Gresham was expanding, the population was growing quite a bit during that time.
That was a little bit. It was like, I remember it being like 3,500 people, which is crazy. And it wasn't really until the 80s, I think, that we didn't start annexing in parts of Rockwood and making it officially Gresham. So that took a little bit longer. But it was what? Well, my grandparents were Marv and Jen Collins. My grandma taught at Kellogg Middle School, and my grandpa didn't teach. He worked at a prefab construction place in Portland. But my grandma taught in the Portland Public School District. Yeah, those were my grandparents.
And how old were you when you were riding your bicycles in the city?
Probably 10 or 12, 8, 10, 12. I mean, we were riding our bikes by ourselves down here, me and my brother, probably when I was 8 and he was 6.
And what years would that be?
Early 70s?
Early 70s. Yeah, did I trample on your flowers? I'm really sorry. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I mean, we had, and I don't want to step on your time, Michael, but we had so much going on for kids in Gresham at that time. I remember taking a calligraphy class over here when this was B. Dalton's bookstore. They would have like programs in the summer for kids. And Cloud Tree had cooking classes that we could take, and so we would ride our bikes down here and do that. I mean, there was a lot going on for younger people to do back then, and so we just really took advantage of all of it, and really had a really good time. It was an innocent time for us. We felt really safe, and it was really innocent, and it was really fun.
Great. Michael, you can start with that question. I'm going to lead you into talking about schools, but
I wonder why.
Everybody had a chance to answer kind of like, what did you do for fun? Where did you spend your time as a child?
Wow. I would say a lot of it was spent at home. My mom was an ER nurse, and she was kind of the primary breadwinner of the family. And then my dad originally worked at the Gresham. When I was in first grade, got hired to work at the Gresham branch for the Portland Teachers Credit Union. And then eventually he wound up being one of the facilities people who worked down at what he calls Montgomery Park, because we still are trying to get him to pronounce Montgomery correctly. Anyway, and so I was a latchkey kid. I lived right next door. My house that I lived in from the time I was 3 to halfway through 5th grade had a gate that opened up to the track at what was then Harold Oliver Intermediate School. And Harold Oliver Primary, where I went kindergarten through 3rd grade, has an adjoining hallway that was built the summer between when I was in kindergarten and 1st grade. So I just would walk across campus, and then since I got a little tired of watching Maury Povich when I got home, and washing dishes and doing laundry. Sometimes I'd stay after school, especially in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and help shelf books in the library or wash the chalkboards. We still had those, and overhead projectors. But then my mom, I tell people that my mom was a missionary to Indonesia. My dad was the guy who taught at the missionary language school, which is why I'm brown. And so we spent, especially when I was younger, we would spend a lot of time going down to Portland State area, because there was a group of Indonesians who would get together and have worship services weekly. But then a lot of them were college or graduate students, as well as other folks like us who had been involved in like missions work, or who had family members involved in that, who would get together. And so some of them wanted to form a church, and others were like, we don't have the financial resources to do that. And so the group that started a church kind of settled down in Tigard, and then the rest wound up going to a church that got a different name now, but the building was right next to the transit center on 122nd and Burnside. And so like church and home and school were kind of mostly my life growing up. And then my mom said some things in life were negotiable, but piano lessons weren't one of them. So at least once a week I would go to my piano lessons as well. And since my mom worked all the time, then she very much valued her time at home. So we had like, at one point in time, she had like 85 rose bushes around our house that she would cultivate. And then I had a few friends that lived around, like my babysitter lived around the corner from me, and then I had a couple of friends who were kind of within biking distance. But by then, the roads were busy enough, and there weren't a lot of sidewalks out in kind of the Rockwoodish area. And I was right close to like Stark and 162nd. So, driving or riding my bike long distances didn't seem particularly safe. So, especially without any bike lanes. And so we kind of just stayed in the little subdivision that I grew up in. And then once I moved across the street from Park Lane, or Harold Oliver Primary at the time, I had a friend who lived about 5 houses down the street who I'd spent time with. He taught me how to play video games and watch Seinfeld. Or reruns on KPTV or whatever.
An important skill.
Yeah, and I now know who the bass player for the Red Hot Chili Peppers is, But then, again, he was down the street, but I didn't really it wasn't until I was in probably high school that I felt, or that I was kind of allowed to take like public transit downtown or, go around a little bit further. And obviously, like once I was a senior in high school or when my sister was a senior in high school, she's 2 years older than me, and got a car, then we started driving around a little bit more everywhere. And so most of my time growing up, I think it was spent more in the like Gateway, Montevilla area. And then as I went to high school in Gresham proper, at Centennial High School, then we found ourselves spending more and more time here in actual Gresham. And so, I don't know, I guess that was, and then obviously once I got employed by the Centennial School District to work at one of the schools that's in Gresham, that now I find that I'm spending even more time here in Gresham even than I did when I was younger. And so, or even in my 20s. So even though I still live on the other side of kind of that, the city line. And of course, when I was born, that I was born in unincorporated Multnomah County, technically. And then when we moved into our house, we were, my first house, that was also unincorporated Multnomah County. And it wasn't until a year or two after we had moved into the house that it became part of the city of Portland. And so we live in that area where there's a lot of like unique small districts, like our water comes from the Rockwood PUD, but then I think our sewers through the Portland Bureau or Water Bureau. So it's kind of this transition space, not so much with a solid identity of being in Portland or Gresham.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what was the other question?
Well, that's kind of where we were going. We'll send the mic that way too. You can answer this question, but then send it that way. Yeah. To just list the schools that you attended, but then you've alluded to the fact that you are a teacher. Michael's a music teacher. But to note if there were any particular teachers or adults at school, classes that made a big impact on your life?
Oh, well, I mean, I'd say most of them, at least for me. But I was also...
Tell us what schools you went to first.
Oh, well, so I spent all 13 years in the Centennial School District. And then I went off to college. So I went to what I said was Harold Oliver Primary, which is now Park Lane Elementary School. I went to Harold Oliver Intermediate, which is now Oliver Middle School. And then I went to Centennial Middle School for 7th and 8th grade. And then high school was Centennial High School. And so, my kindergarten teacher my parents had a unique tradition of like inviting our homeroom teachers to come to our house and have dinner with us once a year. And so, Mrs. Meyer was my kindergarten teacher, and so she came to our house, and I remember like my senior year of high school seeing her when we had our big band garage rummage sale, and I think that was the last time I saw her in person, but it was really nice to just catch up with her. And then my I was part of my teacher that I had in 1st and 2nd grade. She and her teaching partner next door would always loop their classes together, so you'd have the same teacher in first and second grade, but they always offset it. So one teacher was teaching first grade while the other teacher was teaching second. And she had a piano in her classroom. We sang every day for half an hour, and now I teach piano lessons and teach elementary school and have my kids sing while I play the piano. I don't think it's any coincidence that that's part of what I do for a living now. And she came to my senior piano recital when I was in college, so up in Tacoma. So
Wow.
yeah, like she was in the van with my mom. They drove her up and all the things. And she's come to see my classroom, and her grandkids went to Powell Butte Elementary School. So when we'd have our big homecoming parade, the Centennial Homecoming Parade's next week, by the way, then my first few years, she was always in the group right ahead of us because Powell Butte would always be before Butler Creek in the parade. And so like one year she was literally standing right in front of me, and I was the teacher this time, and she was the community member, which I thought was kind of cool. And then my third grade teacher wound up being one of my coworkers my first 2 years teaching at Butler Creek, as was my sixth grade teacher. So, and then I taught her kids. They were my sixth graders. So, and then when I was in high school, I was voted the next Mr. Man 3 years in a row. So to say that my teachers were like my aunts and uncles that I didn't grow up having, because I'm the youngest of the cousins on the white side of my family, my mom's side, and then I don't know any of my dad's family. So they were my people. That was my community. And so I know that that is a big reason why I teach where I do and why I decided to become a teacher.
That's amazing. Yeah, love that.
So I grew up going to I went to Catholic school. My first 3 or 6 years, I went to St. Therese. I actually remember the day my mom came in and told me, because there had been a waiting list situation or something, and I remember the day that she told me that I had gotten into first grade. I was very, very excited. And then I ended up here for 7th and 8th grade after we moved to Gresham proper. I did not go back to St. Therese. We went into the public school system I was in for 2 years. My sister and my brother, my sister went all the way through. My brother came in the 5th grade, and then he stayed all the way through. So they both graduated from Gresham High School. And then I went back to Central Catholic. So I would ride the bus, the public bus, and I caught it at the Rockwood Fred Meyer every morning. My dad would drive me down the hill to the Rockwood Fred Meyer, because we lived not far from my grandparents. And so he would drive me down and drop me off in the dark at the bus stop at the Rockwood Fred Meyer, like 6 in the morning, and I would ride the TriMet bus down to Central, and then I would ride it home in the afternoon until I got a car, of course. And that was perfectly safe, so that was great. So yeah, those are where I went. And just to stick with the Gresham theme, because those will be people you knew, when I was at Dexter, I would say that, I had great teachers, for sure. Brenda Raw was my language arts teacher, and she was amazing, and I never thought I would be an English teacher, but I am now. So I think back to her and the way she was able to build connection with us, and I try to be her, because she just loved all of us so much, and so I try to be her a lot. So she was very impactful. Yeah, a lot of really, Steve Sorry was a math teacher at Dexter when I was there. And I see him every once in a while still too. Yeah, and now I teach English at Barlow High School. So that's me.
I went to West Gresham Grade School and started the first grade in 1953. The teacher was Reed, if I recall. And I went all the way through the 4 years at West Gresham there on Powell. And then I went to East Gresham. While I was at East Gresham, there was a teacher that went from 6th grade to 7th grade. It was Elmer Summerfield. And I always respected him. I saw him years later, and he even remembered my name. Wow. The guy was incredible. He didn't live too far from where I grew up, but anyway, that went to Gresham High School, graduated in 65, And then I went in the Army, and that's about it. So, any other questions?
We'll come back to you, Joe.
Okay.
Same question, Liz.
Same question.
Where did you go to
I
school?
almost forgot what it was. Well, I went to Pleasant Valley Grade School. I started when I was 5, so that would have been 1938. And of course, it was no plumbing. It had an outhouse in the back, a little pot-bellied stove in the corner. But on my second year, I got to move into the brand new school. We had indoor plumbing, so we didn't have to worry about that going outside anymore, just to play. I went all my 8 years at Pleasant Valley. Then when I graduated, I went to Gresham High School, graduated there in 1951. Of course, I was involved in a lot of sports, tumbling, and if I realized back then what you could do to your body would come out in the end when you get older. And my mother was always involved in the school, and my dad too. In fact, their names, George and Elizabeth Bartholomew, was on the plaque in the front of Pleasant Valley Grade School because they were on the school board. And my mother was clerk of the district. And that's about it.
So you could never get in trouble?
Yes, I did get in trouble. I ran down the hallway. You're not supposed to run down hallways in school. They tell you that all the time. So I ran down the hallway, went to catch the door to go outside, and it had glass in it. And I kind of went through the glass with my arm. So Mother had to take care of that.
Wow, I hope you didn't get, that's kind of like punishment enough. I hope you didn't get punished anymore.
I did have 2 teachers. I mean, it's awfully hard remembering back this long, but I did have a Mrs. Young and a Mrs. Swan. And my 8th grade teacher, I remember, was Mr. Herring.
Well, hold on to that mic, Liz. You mentioned, you started going to school when there was no indoor plumbing. And you grew up, I know, a little bit in Depression era.
Yes.
What challenges faced young people when you were growing up? What were the things that were difficult for children and young people in Gresham?
Well, not actually growing up in Gresham. We came to Gresham just for groceries and brought our berries and stuff in. But actually, when I was growing up, when we did things, it was family orientated. We went on picnics and things. And so the Depression, not many people had much back then. Of course, our house didn't even have indoor plumbing, so that was a setback. And we were only allowed 1 bath a week. Otherwise, we used the sink on the back porch, cold water. And when you have to wash your face and brush your teeth in cold water, it wakes you up. And other than that, that's about the only difficulties we had.
And I know that you picked berries and you made money picking berries. What did you want to spend your money on?
Well, you learn to be very frugal. And one time, I think I was 8, and and my parents paid us for picking at the going rate at any time, so we earned our own money. And when we were younger, my mother made our clothes, but when we got older, we wanted to buy our own, so we earned our money. But when I was 8, I wanted a bicycle. And if you know 190th, it's quite a ways up. And so I did buy my bicycle. It cost me $50, and back then that was a lot of money. And I was 8. But when you learn to pick berries, you learn to pick fast, because the more you pick, the more money you make. And so it was quite interesting. I did fine going down the hill, but like Jeannie said, coming back up the hill isn't very much fun. But once I grew up, I still had the same bicycle, and I finally gave it to my niece.
Oh my gosh, wow. Okay. We're going to pass that on to Joe. And Joe, same question. You're not quite 20 years on from Liz, but what was happening? What were the challenges? What were the difficulties facing young people?
The biggest challenge I had, I think, was the fact that I was an only child. And I didn't like that. My cousins, there was 4 of them, and they'd come over to visit, and I was always jealous of the fact that there was all them brothers and sisters. Called them my brothers and sisters to this day. The reason I was an only child was my mother miscarried at least once, maybe twice, and I think she figured it out years later that it was probably the RH factor, the blood RH factor, and they hadn't figured it out yet, so that was the biggest, I guess, obstacle I had. But
and I know you had strawberries near your house.
We did have strawberries. You're referring to the middle of the evening. I was on the way home from one of my chums. Been kind of late getting home, but I was walking by one of the fields at the end of the street across from our house, and the strawberry aroma was just strong. I mean, they were ripe, and I looked across the fence, and there were big ones in there. And it was probably going to get picked the next day because they had a lot of the hallux, and the crates were all out and lined up. So it was getting towards the dusk, so under the fence I go. I thought they wouldn't miss one berry.
You didn't want it to go to waste.
No, I didn't want it to go to waste. So I took one of the flats and I walked over to the row, and before I knew it, the flat was full. Now that I'd spent all this time picking berries, I thought, what am I going to do with them? I guess I'd just have to take them home. So I walked in the back door at the kitchen. My dad was sitting at the table, which he usually did in the evening, and reading the newspaper. And he looked up and he saw me with this flat of strawberries, and he knew I didn't buy them. Where did you get those? I said, well, they were in the field at the end of the street, and they were just looking so good. And he says, you know better than that. And I said, yes, sir. He says, don't ever do that again, get the sugar. So I guess got into a little trouble that time.
A little trouble.
That's
all right.
Yeah.
Okay, same question, Jenny.
What was it?
What
challenges did we face? Well, so through the 70s, right? So I'm growing up here. It's like mid 70s, late 70s. It was a pretty prosperous time. I mean, I remember it being kind of like my parents were middle class, my grandparents were middle class. We didn't really kids didn't have to work. Although my grandma would take us out picking berries. She had grown up an only child, and that's a whole long story. But so she had really took advantage of all of the agriculture and everything around here. So we did go pick berries, even though we didn't need the money. She just made us go do it because she liked that to go do that, I guess. I don't know. But my biggest problem, I love you, Mom, so much, but was our parents. Because they were always getting in the way of all the things we wanted to go do. They just don't understand. They didn't. And they couldn't understand why we didn't come home when we were supposed to come home, or why we snuck out in the middle of the night, or why we just did all the things that we did. And so, and I'm tongue in cheek, but like it was a prosperous time. It was a fairly safe time still. I do remember like the first couple of stories about, kids going with people that they shouldn't have gone with and ending up getting hurt. And I remember that being weird. I was probably like 10 or 12 when I first heard that kind of a story, which is wild because you would teach that to a very small child now. And I had no concept until I was probably 10 or 12 that anyone would ever want to hurt me. Like, I would go wherever I wanted, and every adult was somebody I could trust. So we didn't really have a challenge other than just trying not to get in trouble, you know? That was our biggest one. Until high school, and that's a whole different story.
Same question, Michael.
Yeah, no, this one makes me think a lot. 'Cause, I mean, I think as far as challenges are concerned with people, you know, my generation, I don't know, like, when people ask me, like, why did you start a community band or why do you teach where you do? I just remember growing up and having a lot of experiences and doors shut as I grew up. Like, I remember being super excited to be able to, like, be in the after-school recorder club or whatever, and it got cut, like, the year before I was supposed to be in it. I remember I was supposed to, or I got the opportunity to have beginning band as a pull-out class in 5th and 6th grade, and by the time my freshman year came around, that position got cut. I remember like a lot of like, as much as I love that the Center for Advanced Learning was opened, that meant that a lot of the students that I was in band with wound up not being able to do both, going there and being in band. And I remember and that's just specifically with music, but I mean, my senior year of high school was the first year that we didn't have a mixed chorus, and that was the one year I got to be in choir. So I wound up being in the men's chorus instead of being able to sing in a mixed ensemble. Just a lot of those kinds of opportunities kind of just got. And again, it wasn't just with, like, the music program. It happened all across the school. And then I also, I mean, I don't know, the Thurston High School shooting happened when I was in 4th grade. And then the next year, the Columbine shooting happened, and I was in 5th grade. You know, and then when I was teaching, my principal, who's now our superintendent, had been teaching in the Reynolds School District before he was our principal, and there was a shooting at Reynolds High School while I was teaching, or, you know, like once I came back and was teaching in this community. I mean, I even remember the year I taught in Arizona, driving home from work one day and hearing about a shooting at the Clackamas Town Center Mall all the way down while I was in Scottsdale. And so, like, that's, and I also know that, like, growing up, I was told, like, don't open the door if somebody comes when we're not here. And, you know, like, having to be very careful about answering the phone. And so I just know that we talk a lot. Well, and then, of course, like, the September 11th terrorist attack happened when I was in 8th grade. And so, you know, like, the people like me who are in their 30s and people who are younger are just a whole lot more aware of some of these other things that are going on in the world. And, like, that's a lot of the stuff that I even see my students walking into school with, or being able to ask questions about, you know, in grades as young as, like, 2nd or 3rd. And so, just that, but at the same time, like, I know that, well, and then, I don't know, my perception of my community back then was still that it was a fairly safe place. Like, I know that we were always very careful about locking doors, and making sure, whether it was in the car or with the house. But you know, as time went on, my car's been broken into more times than I can care to admit. But then the thing that also gets frustrating with that is that, like, people who I grew up with who've moved away then will complain about how much the neighborhood's gone downhill or whatever, but I also tell them, well, yeah, but do you see that really cool Mexican grocery store that's just around the corner? Or, like, I can actually now walk to St. Aidan's Episcopal Church, where I am an intern, and I don't have to worry about getting hit by a car very much because there are marked crosswalks that I can walk there to or with. And like Park Lane Park is being rebuilt right now. And so I can't, and it was a rock quarry that needed to settle for several years. So like growing up with that just kind of seeming wasteland, all of a sudden now being able to be utilized as a park, I can't wait to see where that goes in the future. So like, I don't know, I feel like that question is one that, at least for me, is a lot more nuanced than just, oh, there was, like, yeah, back in the good old days, this, that, or the other thing. Whereas, like, you know, and I think that the kinds of things that we worry about, even, and that children worry about, even now, growing up, even in this community, of, like, this larger community of East Multnomah County, they're just different questions than, but in some ways are also very similar to questions about like, or concerns about growing up during the Depression. Like, because those are also like things that happen on a global scale that affect our everyday lives. They just look different.
Thank you. And I think you are speaking to a lot of sort of questions about the universality of childhood, and then, you know, what's universal versus what's really specific given people's unique identities and their unique perspectives and where and who they are. And so one of the questions, I mean, you actually led into the final question really nicely about how Gresham specifically has changed since you have been a child, and just even mentioning specific places, crosswalks being put in, population growth. Obviously, by the time currently, we're the fourth largest city in the state of Oregon. So the population has grown and changed, and you've mentioned a few things. Is there anything else? That's the last question that I'll ask before we turn it over to Q&A, but how Gresham has changed since you were a child.
Well, I mean, the school that I teach at literally didn't exist when I was a child. It was opened my sophomore year of high school. You know, and it's weird that, you know, at the ripe old age of 37, or really, was it 32 or something, I became the music teacher who'd been there for half of the school's existence. You know, like that's crazy to think about. And when I started teaching there, I drove by a bunch of blueberry fields and nurseries, and now those are all subdivisions. I used to drive by a horse stable, and it's mostly subdivision. You know, I obviously I get a little bit concerned with, I don't know, I tend to be somebody who likes walkable infrastructure, so I get a little bit concerned about some of these houses that we're building without other community resources in those neighborhoods. And Butler Creek is a good example of that, where it's a lot of houses, but there aren't community centers or third spaces for kids to walk to. I mean, we have a couple of parks, but that's about it. If they need to get groceries, or if they, you know, they want to just go down and get a soda or something, they have to go like all the way down to Safeway. But at the same time, you know, you were mentioning the Rockwood Fred Meyer, and I talked to most of the people in my school, and they don't know what that was. You know, I'm like, well, it was this Fred Meyer, but it was kind of weird because there was the grocery store part on one side of the street, and there was the home and garden center, but now that's a flea market. And then where the Kentucky Fried Chicken is now, like it's now a county courthouse. And there was a bowling alley back there before, but now it's part of like an affordable housing complex, and I don't know what all else is over there, you know, like, and then the Rockwood Market Hall is now there, and it's really cool because they have all these like food places you can go eat at, and they do like a flea market kind of situation, and they have a lot of performances there, but it's still kind of getting, built, you know, but yeah, it used to be a Fred Meyer, you know, or like I had a coworker who taught in our school for a few years, and he tried to make the excuse that he was new to our school, and I said, no, I remember you being an assistant who would dismiss me to recess when I was in kindergarten, so you don't get to say that you're new. And then I was like, and I also remember when you worked at the bowling alley that was on like 176th and Powell, that no longer, or no, yeah, or something, like just, you know, the neighborhood has definitely changed. And so we have a lot of shopping centers that seem kind of dead. And that makes me kind of sad. And I kind of wonder what we could do to revamp some of those spaces to make them more usable. Like a horse corral that no longer exists out where I live. But at the same time, the things that are being put in there, I think, are quite interesting. Like there's supposed to be a new food cart situation right in that Highland or the shopping center there on 174th and Powell. And we have the Eastside Timbers complex where kids get to practice soccer. And so, I don't know. Even just in the last 37 years, there's been quite a bit of change to our neighborhood.
Same question, Jenny.
Okay, so it's interesting. I have a sister who's 7 years younger than I am, and if she and I were to talk about our experience growing up in Gresham, hers would be much more like yours than mine, and I fully acknowledge I am like the last of the generation to have that, not worrying about all those things, and I am grateful. The housing is different. There's just so many more people. Traffic is way, all of those things. I do wish we were learning our lesson from Mid-Multnomah County was designed to be this bedroom community type of thing, and they had this vision that people would go into Portland or into other places and work and then just come home there, and so they didn't need a lot of infrastructure. Clearly, that is not the case, and I do wish we were learning that lesson when we're building new housing, because we're repeating that same sort of mistake again, I think, in a lot of places. But people can talk about everything that's changed. I would like to just say that I think the thing that hasn't changed is the way people in Gresham care about each other. I meet people every day who go out of their way to be kind, to keep our community clean, to help one another when they need it. So I always tell people that Gresham is a big city that still feels like a small town. And that part for me hasn't changed, and I'm really grateful that I live in a place like that where I have all this stuff, but yet it still feels like a community and a small town that cares about each other. So.
Well, I'm going to add that to the question that Joe's going to answer. What has changed and what has stayed the same?
I grew up during a time that was pretty well safe. We could run anywhere, do anything, stay out late, as long as you didn't bring strawberries home. It was a wonderful time. It's changed into something that, of course, where I live is not a good example. Mm-hmm. I'm subjected to the homeless highway that goes right down the Linneman Trailhead. Yeah. In June of last year, not this year, but last year, my wife woke me up in the middle of the night. We had a person break into our home, opened our bedroom door. It's not the same community I grew up in, and I'm happy you're feeling like everybody.
If I lived where you lived, I wouldn't feel like that.
No, I've seriously considered, even though I grew up in this house, was conceived in this house, I'm seriously considering selling and just getting the hell out of Dodge. Mm-hmm. But I'm in a vulnerable location, so I guess maybe you got to make your own decisions about it. What was the question, the second question?
What stayed the same?
What has stayed the same?
What has stayed the same? Mm-hmm. I remember as a child going with my dad to downtown Gresham, to Kidder's Hardware or to Grant's or to the Cornet stores or whatever, and you'd run into people that you knew, that he knew from high school, and it was like a family reunion in a way. Mm-hmm. I think that still exists because I run into people when I worked here at the museum. One of the reasons I came was because I enjoyed finding people that I went to school with, or relatives to people I went to school with. It's just reconnecting. So I think that's still available, is still there, but it's hard to find.
Yeah.
Fair.
Well, when I grew up on the farm, We didn't bother to lock our doors or cars or whatever, if we had a car. Nowadays, I live on 4th Street, just up here. I even lock all the doors when I'm inside the house. When I go work out in the yard, I lock the house, make sure I have my house key, because if I'm in the backyard, I don't know who might break into the front, because there is an open field across the street from my house, and we did have a homeless man there for quite a while. And he was getting on something and be so crazy and carried a big stick around and stuff. But another thing in Gresham that has changed is we used to have skating. I loved skating. And we don't have a skating. I think Oaks Rink is the only skating rink left, which is sad, because my sisters and I, my mother would bring us into the skating rink, and that's in fact where I met my husband when we were both in the 7th grade. He went to West Gresham and I went to Pleasant Valley, but we still met in the skating rink. And another thing that we don't have anymore, I think we only have one bowling alley out here. And my husband and I were great bowlers. We just bowled 3 leagues a week and just loved bowling. And so that's sad to see. Another sad thing is they have extended our city limits so far. It's not really a small town. On the news, I hear something about Gresham, Oregon, and I think, oh, what's happened? And here it is up on 170-something and whatever. I think of Gresham as Gresham. This is our boundaries. And when I was younger and we came in shopping for groceries and stuff, we actually became friends with the meat market. George Deedle had the meat market. And in fact, when I got married, he and his wife even came to our wedding because we had grown so fond of them. And so that's sad to see. But like Jeannie was saying, Gresham is a very nice town, and everybody seems to want to work together and help each other. And another thing I'm glad to see is we do have a lot of parks, which we didn't have way back then, and that is nice to see.
And a wonderful museum.
Yeah. Oh yes, the museum.
in the center of town. Thank you, all of you. I'm not going to give a round of applause yet, because I'm going to turn the questions over to the audience. If anybody has a question that they would like to ask individually or to the group. Okay, I'm going to come and have you say your name and your question into the microphone.
My name is Dorothy Douglas, and my question is for Liz. Didn't you and Dick Dowsett win a couples contest at the skating rink?
We were in competition, but I was not Dick's partner. His partner was Squeak Obrick. And, but she couldn't show up for the photo shoot, so Dick and I took the picture together. So,
and that's the picture that's...
And that was in one of our newsletters.
Is that the picture in the...
So when the house we moved into was right across the street from Joel Obrick's.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's where I lived from the 6th grade on until I got married. And was the skating rink where was it when you were a kid?
The Fun Center, it's on Powell. It's now the Indian School.
Say that into the... yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
The senior center on Powell, that's where the skating rink
The skating rink was...
I think I knew that. I remember hearing that.
Yeah. And that picture that they just talked about of Liz and Dick is featured on the poster for the Voices of Gresham podcast. You can see their cute little faces, the two of them.
Look a little closer at that.
Yes. Also, there is a picture over here of Betty, who is Liz's sister, is in...
I'm in there too.
Are you really? I'm sorry, Liz. Apologies.
All 3 of us were in there.
Really?
Yeah.
All 3 Bartholomew girls. Mm-hmm. So this is a gymkhana, correct? Gymkhana. There's a picture here. Come look at it after the event. But and some roller skates. There is a picture of the fun center in here. So yeah, and that's been a big topic in our oral history collection is roller skating, which is I just went and interviewed the person who was crowned the roller skating queen of America, and she now lives in Southern Oregon. Yeah, but she grew up here. Any other questions from the audience?
Skate world, though.
No, this was back at the Fun Center. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Okay.
Miss Helen.
Yeah, I didn't hear anybody talk about the Multnomah County Fair. My God, that was huge in Gresham.
Yes.
You talk.
Go ahead, Liz. Did you hear that? What was your experience with the Multnomah County Fair?
Well, I didn't really, we had our 4-H projects, and we always entered those in the fair, and it was just really nice having it in town. When it moved out of town, I think I went once, and that was it, because it just was not the same.
Yeah.
Of course, my husband always told me he would sneak under the fence to get in, but I always went in the front door.
I've heard that too. Joe, what about you? Did you pay to get in?
No, I didn't always pay to pay. I'll be honest with you. Just like the strawberry case. The fair was always, the statute of limitations. The fair was always a significant event every summer, and the neighbor across the street from our house had a garage that faced Powell that they would always apply posters and such on. And he would get these free passes, and so Dad would always help him out, and he'd always pass. They never went to the Forbes was the name. Walt was his first name, Walt and Minnie. I called them Grandma and Grandpa. But they'd always give us the free passes, and so we'd go to the fair. And then later on, when I was in high school, then that's when I started breaking in. Larceny.
Who was on the fair board?
Yeah. Have any comment?
No, because the fair was gone by the time I could remember. We just rode in the field. But I could swear that somebody from Grandma's side of the family was on the fair board.
I always felt that it was a big mistake.
Graham Crane, her dad. Yeah, he was on the fair board, wasn't he? Yeah, he was like the president of the Multnomah County Fair for a number of years.
I always felt that it was a big mistake when they took the Multnomah County Fair out of Gresham. I think it would have been a significant thing to keep, but it's too late now. The land is all
But the
divided.
land was more valuable as a shopping center.
Yeah, that's probably what it was, but it would have been more community oriented if they kept the fair going here. So, big
Agreed.
mistake.
Agreed.
Any other questions or comments? Melissa?
Let's bring back the fair.
Okay, mine is for Michael. Is that okay? I'm a Rockwood resident. It makes me sad sometimes that there's not a lot of resources for our history. What were some memorable, I guess, mom and pop shops or restaurants growing up?
The one that first comes to mind is Pa's Kettle on 176th and Powell, or Division. It was it's now I think a teriyaki ramen place. It's a little house. And they had these greasy scones that they would sell with honey butter and the runniest strawberry jam. But I mean, I just remember going to, like my folks would go there and we'd get a batch of those every once in a while. And then the high school drumline would always go to Pa's Kettle right before a marching band competition. Unfortunately, one of those was one where I was working with the band by then. I was in college. My dad had given me his car 2 days earlier, and I totaled it on the way home because I went to go get my driver's license. And then I grew up going to Lynch Baptist Church, which is now part of Imago Dei. Eventually it was called Living Hope. It was on 148th and Powell, or 148th close to Powell, across from what used to be, I think, Lynch Park School, and then it became the Montessori School behind the Fred Meyer on 148th Division. And a bunch of us from the youth group, they were, I guess, half David Douglas students and then half like Centennial or Barlow kids. Not very many Gresham kids went to my church growing up. Yeah, but a couple of Barlow kids. I didn't quite understand how that all worked out. Yeah, but we would also, go to Cruisers Drive-In on 136th and Division as well, a lot. That was kind of the greasy spoon place that we would go to. And then, it's not in Rockwood, but after marching band, we would often go to the Borders, which is now the Craft Warehouse, because the newly initiated Gresham Station. And so I just remember having a lot of late night coffee before a long study session after marching band practice with some friends, like discussing the politics of being in the high school band, and have very serious conversations about group dynamics and whatnot. I guess, as they said, there were the bowling alleys that we would go to. Barely Read Books is still in existence. We went there a few times. And so, I don't know, I guess those were like the main places. By the time I was in high school, Cafe Delirium was open. So it had been open for like a year or two, I think, at that point in time. So we would, that was another place that we would go to a lot, just because there aren't a lot of those spaces in Rockwood specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw another hand over here. Is there another question?
I did. When I was little, we would drive by it all the time. We would drive by the satellite. Okay, so when we lived on 151st and we were in that area, we would always drive by the satellite restaurant, and I thought it was so cool because it had this really cool sign. And I remember thinking when I grew up, I'm going to go to the satellite restaurant, and then it was no more by the time I grew up.
Well, one thing I know about Gresham is that it likes its signs.
Was it nice? I never got to dance at the drum, or not the drum, but what was the dance place that was back? The D Street Corral? Division Street Corral. I never got to go dancing there either. That made me sad.
I guess the other one that really sticks out to me that I didn't go to very often, but I have a couple of times in my 20s, was Giuseppe's, next to the Rockwood Library.
Yeah, that's a good
That was another one of those places that people would go to if they wanted, Italian food, Italian-American food from a certain era.
That's good.
Yeah.
We went there a bunch. That was good.
Oh, there you are.
There was, I would address to the state.
Oh, okay, yes.
There was a Keno's grocery store.
Keno's grocery store.
Yep.
The one on 106.
On 162nd.
Yeah.
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 Oh.
With banana cake. Banana cake.
They had that banana cake.
The Keno's banana cake, yes.
If anybody has a Keno's banana cake recipe, I will pay you money.
Well, the new season says that they have it.
They lie.
I know, it doesn't taste the same,
Yeah.
but it is pretty close.
By the time I grew up, I wound up going to the Keno's that was out on in Menlo Park, because the one that you're talking about didn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, by the time I grew up, it didn't exist either.
This used to be a grocery store right here. That was my favorite grocery store growing up. This one that was right here, I don't remember what it was called, but it was not a Safeway, Mom. I love you. When you got to write the price on the thing at Safeway. And then what was it? Because that was my favorite. That was the only way my mom got me to go grocery shopping. Is my brother and I would fight over who got to write. You had the grease pencil, and you'd write on the can how much the price was. And yes,
Prairie Mart.
And that's how she got us to go grocery shopping with her. She would tell us we could write on the thing. And they had those big carts, and you could hang your feet off the end of them.
Yeah.
That was after it was safe. Okay, whatever. Apparently, I wasn't paying attention until they got the grease pencil, because then it was fun.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of people in the audience who need to come and do an oral history with me. And we're always looking. So I will, yes?
We're talking in the library.
Yes. Yes. Raise your hand in the audience if you remember coming to this library.
I brought my children here to sign up for the library, and since I live in Clackamas County, the lady said, what is your address? And I told her, and I said Damascus, or I said Boring, Oregon. At that time, I said Gresham, Oregon. Then it was changed to Boring. Then it was changed to Damascus. And it's the same house. I didn't live in this county. 'Cause I was
Oh, you're in Clackamas County, yeah.
So when she went to that, she said, you can't register here. No. And he was 2 years old, ready for school, ready to go to kindergarten or preschool or whatever it is. So I walked out of here like, I was so mad. I thought, I'm teaching that school over there, and then you're telling me my child can't get a book in this library. Well, then the creme de creme was that this library had a book mobile. Yes.
I was just going to mention that.
Area. Yeah. And my daughter came home and said, Mama, guess what? A bookmobile came today. And I said, oh, really? From where? Do you think your brother could go when he gets there too?
Says the reader. Says the person who was like, you wanted more, didn't you, Liz? And more often. Yep. That. Yes. Well, I want to just honor everybody's time since we're at 6:10. And this is the thing about talking about growing up and all these places that are part of the daily fabric. They don't seem like when you go to the grocery store or some mom and pop shop, you don't realize how much it means to you until it's gone, or till later you're talking with somebody and you realize you have that shared experience. It's all part of our identity. So thank you so much for coming, but thank you so much to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. And I'll use the plug to say, if anybody is interested in having an oral history done, or if they know somebody who should be interviewed, if you have ideas for the podcast for season 2, talk to me, talk to Sylvie, and thank you so much for coming.